A king is burying his jade regalia in the floor of his own throne room, not hiding it from an enemy, hiding it from the future. Because he knows the city is ending, and he wants someone, someday, to find proof that it was real. A jade mosaic pectoral, green as the Seba forest, heavy as a king's debt, hanging loose against a chest that hasn't filled out yet. The cord is woven cotton, and it was made for a man. He is not a man. He is 12 years old, standing barefoot on limestone steps that still carry the axe scars of an enemy army that came through this city and left it breathing, barely. The obsidian lancet is cold in both his hands. It catches the morning light. Around him, what remains of a court watches in silence, priests, nobles, survivors, waiting to see if a boy can perform the ritual that says, "We are still here. We are still a people. We choose to continue." Below the steps, the city is half empty. The plazas that once held thousands hold dozens. The gods have not spoken in years. He raises the lancet. And here is the question this video is going to sit with for the next 14 minutes. What does it take to rebuild a civilization, not once, but twice? And what do you lose when you finally can't? That boy's name is Kinich Janab Pakal. History will call him Pakal the Great. In 615 AD, he ascends the throne of Palenque, a city in the Chiapas highlands that had been militarily humiliated, politically gutted, and left structurally dependent on enemies. The rival city of Calakmul had orchestrated a campaign against Palenque through its proxy Caracol, and by the time young Pakal takes power, his dynasty is a dynasty in name only. For 40 years, the city's divine lords, the Ajas, had been losing. Not skirmishes, wars. The kind of losses that get carved into the victor's monuments and left for your grandchildren to read. He will reign for 68 years. He will rebuild Palenque into one of the most architecturally sophisticated cities in the ancient world. The Temple of the Inscriptions, built over his own tomb, contains a sarcophagus lid that NASA engineers in the 1960s would mistake, briefly, for a man operating a spacecraft. He doesn't just restore his city, he reframes its entire political mythology, inventing a genealogical narrative that connects his bloodline to gods, making Palenque's revival feel not like recovery, but like destiny. But Pakal's story isn't the story, it's the doorway into it. Because Palenque's recovery in 615 AD wasn't the first time the Maya had done this. It wasn't even the second. And that's just the beginning. Because the real question is, how does a civilization learn to survive its own death? And what happens when that knowledge disappears? Here's what this video is actually about. The Maya didn't collapse once. They collapsed 3 separate times across 1,500 years. 3 times cities emptied, populations crashed, agricultural systems failed, and political structures dissolved. And twice they came back. Not as a shadow of what they were, as something more sophisticated than what came before. What you're going to see is a pattern, a specific pattern of resilience that the Maya built, watched fall apart, and then built again, across centuries, across collapses, across 3 separate endings that somehow never quite stuck. You're going to see exactly which agricultural innovations saved the classic Maya after the pre-classic breakdown. You're going to see how Chichen Itza rebuilt a civilization using a trade network model that looks, structurally, almost identical to what economists call distributed systems today. And then you're going to see what was different about the third collapse, why the same civilization that had survived volcanic winters, century-long droughts, and total political fragmentation could not survive what came after 1519. The answer is not what most people think. It's not the Spanish army. It's not even the disease. Not exactly. It's what the Maya lost between their second recovery and their third collapse. A specific kind of institutional knowledge. And once you see what it was, you will not be able to stop thinking about what we might be losing right now. Don't skip ahead. To understand what the Maya recovered from, you have to understand what they built. Start at El Mirador, deep in the Petén lowlands of northern Guatemala, so far into the jungle that the only way to reach it today is a 5-day hike or a helicopter. In 300 BC, El Mirador was the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. Not the largest Maya city, the largest city anywhere in the Americas. The Ladanta pyramid complex there contains, by volume, more construction material than the Great Pyramid of Giza. By roughly 100 BC, El Mirador's population was approaching 100,000 people, in a rainforest, centuries before the Common Era. And moving a civilization's institutional memory, its calendars, its agricultural cycles, its political logic, that is not a refugee crisis. That is a controlled migration of everything that made a city a city. You cannot feed 100,000 people in a tropical lowland without solving water. You cannot build Ladanta without solving logistics. The Preclassic Maya solved both. They built a reservoir system, interconnected catchment basins and plastered channels that could store enough water to carry a city through a dry season. They developed raised field agriculture in the wetlands around their cities, long platforms of elevated soil pulled up from drained swamps, which could grow crops year-round while the surrounding land flooded and recovered. This is not primitive subsistence farming. This is engineered food security. And then, between roughly 150 AD and 250 AD, it collapsed. The Ilopango volcano, in what is now El Salvador, erupted in approximately 539 AD. But the Preclassic stress began earlier, with a combination of drought cycles and political fragmentation that modern dendrochronology, tree ring analysis, has now mapped with remarkable precision. The rains became unreliable. The raised fields, which required coordinated maintenance across communities, began to fail when the political structures that organized that maintenance fractured. El Mirador didn't fall to an army. It emptied. People left. By 250 AD, a city of 100,000 had been reduced to something closer to a ceremonial site with a caretaker population. This is the first collapse. And here's what's strange about it. The scribes came with them. So did the astronomers, the engineers who understood the raised field irrigation systems, the priests who held the long count calendar in their heads. The cities emptied, but the people who knew how to build cities did not. The people who left El Mirador went somewhere. They carried techniques, agricultural, architectural, astronomical, into the lowland cities that would become the classic Maya heartland. Tikal, Copan, Caracol, Palenque. Cities that would, between 250 AD and 800 AD, reach a cultural and scientific sophistication that still stops archaeologists cold. The classic Maya calculated the length of the solar year to within 0.0002 days of the figure we use today, using only naked eye astronomy and a positional number system that included the concept of zero, which Europe wouldn't independently develop for another 6 centuries. They built hydraulic systems under Tikal's plazas, essentially underground cisterns, that could hold enough water to supply 80,000 people through a 6-month dry season. They cultivated at least 30 distinct crop species simultaneously, creating an agricultural redundancy that meant no single drought could wipe out the food supply. This is a civilization operating at full capacity, at the peak of its complexity, at the exact moment when complexity becomes a vulnerability. Because by 800 AD, something was going wrong, and the Maya, for all their sophistication, did not see it coming. 7 o'clock to 11:30. The classic Maya collapse is the one most people have heard of. 50-plus cities abandoned in the space of 200 years. Populations in the southern lowlands dropping by an estimated 90% between 800 AD and 1000 AD. Tikal, a city that may have held 120,000 people at its height, reduced to a ghost site by 950 AD, the jungle already pulling its temples back into itself. The standard explanation is drought, and the drought was real. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores from Lake Chichon-Canab in the Yucatan have identified a series of severe, multi-year droughts between 800 and 1000 AD, some lasting a decade or more. But drought alone doesn't explain the pattern. The Maya had survived drought before. Their reservoir systems were specifically engineered for it. Here's what the drought exposed: a structural fragility that had been building for centuries. The classic Maya political system was hyper-centralized. Each major city-state was organized around a single divine king, an Aja, whose legitimacy rested on his ability to mediate between the human and supernatural worlds. Agricultural surplus flowed upward through a tribute system to the royal court. Infrastructure maintenance, those reservoirs, those raised fields, was organized and funded from the center. Here is the part that keeps coming up in the archaeological record and is genuinely hard to explain. When the droughts hit and the harvests failed, the tribute demands on commoner farmers did not ease up. They went up. The lords needed more maize to feed their courts, more labor to finish their monuments, more of everything, precisely when there was less of everything to give. Kings demanded more from populations that had less. The archaeological record at multiple sites shows a spike in monumental construction, temples, stela, royal tombs, in the decades immediately before abandonment. Kings building harder to prove they still had divine favor, extracting more labor from populations already under stress. Each failure fed the next one. Weak harvests meant weak kings. Weak kings meant more wars. More wars meant fewer farmers in the fields. And fewer farmers meant the next harvest was already compromised before the rains even came. And once it started, the centralized structure that had made the classic Maya great became the mechanism of their destruction. Now, you remember the boy on the steps, the jade pectoral pulling at his neck. The question was, what does it take to rebuild a civilization, and what do you lose when you finally can't? Here's the partial answer. What Pakal did in 615 AD, what made his recovery work, was not military, it was institutional. He rebuilt Palenque's legitimacy through narrative. He commissioned the longest hieroglyphic text ever found in the Maya world, carved into the temple of the inscriptions, connecting his reign to a mythological past that made continuity feel inevitable. He reformed the tribute flows. He rebuilt the water infrastructure. He made the center hold for another 2 centuries. But the classic collapse that came after 800 AD was a different order of problem. And the northern cities that survived it, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Koba, survived by doing something the southern cities had refused to do. They decentralized. Chichen Itza, by 900 AD, had become something structurally unlike anything the classic Maya had built. Instead of a single divine king at the center of a tribute pyramid, it operated through a council system, a multipal in Maya, where power was distributed across a group of elite lineages. No single point of failure. Simultaneously, it plugged into a long-distance maritime trade network running around the Yucatan Peninsula that connected it to resources and populations far beyond any drought's reach. Obsidian from central Mexico, copper from the American Southwest, cacao from the Pacific coast. A city that the classic system would have starved became, under a distributed model, one of the most prosperous urban centers in the hemisphere. The second recovery worked because it abandoned the thing that had made the second collapse inevitable. The Maya didn't just rebuild, they redesigned. And then came 1519. And this time, the redesign wasn't enough. The Spanish arrival is usually framed as a military conquest. It wasn't, not primarily. Hernán Cortés landed in 1519 with 600 men. The last independent Maya city, Tayasal, in the Petén Lakes of Guatemala, didn't fall until 1697. The Spanish declared the Maya conquered in 1546. The last independent Maya kingdom, Nopetén in the Petén Lakes, did not fall until 1697. That is a century and a half of active, organized resistance long after the rest of Mesoamerica had been absorbed into the colonial system. The Maya fought. They adapted. They retreated into jungle and highland redoubts and kept fighting across nearly 2 centuries. But they couldn't recover. And the reason is 3 simultaneous shocks that hit faster than any resilient system could absorb. First, biological. Smallpox arrived in Mesoamerica in 1520. By 1600, the indigenous population of the Maya region had fallen from an estimated 8 to 10 million people to somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million. That is a 90% population collapse in 80 years. The raised field agriculture systems required coordinated human labor. The reservoir maintenance required coordinated human labor. The trade networks required people to run them. When 90% of the people are gone, the infrastructure doesn't degrade, it vanishes. Second, institutional. In July of 1562, a Franciscan friar named Diego de Landa ordered the burning of every Maya book he could find in the town of Mani in the Yucatan. He burned 40 hieroglyphic codices, bark paper books, in a single afternoon. We know of only 4 Maya codices that survived. 4. The agricultural calendars, the astronomical tables, the water management records, the medical knowledge, gone in an afternoon. De Landa himself later wrote, with apparent satisfaction, that the Maya lamented to a wonderful degree and found it painful. Third, ecological. The Spanish forced the conversion of Maya agricultural land to cattle ranching and sugar monoculture. The diversified, multi-species food system that had been the backbone of every Maya recovery, 30 crops, redundant water systems, maintained wetland fields, was replaced with single-crop extraction agriculture. The resilience architecture of the food system was dismantled systematically, in the name of colonial efficiency. Any one of these shocks, the Maya had mechanisms to survive. All 3 simultaneously, with no recovery window between them, that was a different category of problem. And here is where this stops being history. In 2023, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change identified agricultural monoculture as a primary driver of food system fragility in 142 countries. The United States currently grows 96% of its corn from 3 genetic varieties. 3. The entire global banana export market depends on a single cultivar, the Cavendish, that is currently under existential threat from a soil fungus called Fusarium TR4, which has already devastated crops across Asia, Australia, and parts of Latin America. The diversity that saved the Maya twice has been systematically engineered out of the global food system in the name of yield efficiency. And institutional knowledge. The Maya lost theirs to fire in an afternoon in 1562. We are losing ours to something slower and harder to see. The consolidation of expertise into systems and platforms that exist outside any individual's ability to reconstruct. When the system fails, the knowledge doesn't transfer. It disappears with the server. The Maya didn't fail because they were primitive. They failed because 3 simultaneous, overlapping shocks arrived faster than their resilience architecture could respond, and because the knowledge needed to rebuild had been taken from them before the rebuilding had to begin. 3 collapses, 2 recoveries, and a third that was imposed from the outside, by steel and disease and deliberate erasure, and still did not finish the job. The Maya story is not about a civilization that fell. It is about one that kept deciding, generation after generation, that falling was not the same thing as ending. Twice they rebuilt from nothing using a formula: diversify the food, distribute the power, protect the knowledge at all costs. The boy on the steps with the jade pectoral pulling at his neck, he understood something that the last generation of Maya leaders before 1519 had not yet lost and would soon lose forever. that a civilization is not its monuments. It is not its kings. It is the accumulated, transmissible knowledge of how to survive what's coming next. Pakal rebuilt Palenque not by restoring what it was, but by preserving what it knew. Learn from the past to shape the future. That's not a slogan. For the Maya, for 1,500 years, it was a survival mechanism. The third collapse wasn't final because the Maya ran out of strength. It was final because someone else decided what was worth remembering. The question this video leaves open is the one that should keep you up at night. If the Maya's third collapse was made unsurvivable not by the initial shock, but by the destruction of the knowledge needed to recover, then what does that mean for the institutional knowledge we are currently failing to protect? That question leads directly to a civilization that faced a similar triple shock: biological plague, institutional collapse, and ecological disruption in 14th century Europe. And what emerged from it reshaped the entire Western world. That video is next. The pattern is the same. The outcome was not.